Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Islamic Economics Series. Let's talk about something that affects pretty much every single one of us, our paycheck. Have you ever looked at what you earn, or maybe what other people earn, and just had this nagging feeling that something is off? Well, today, we're going to explore that exact feeling. We're diving deep into the very idea of a just wage by looking at a really fascinating paper that challenges almost everything we think we know about why we get paid what we do.
And this really is the big question, isn't it? Why is it that when we look out at the world, the wages people earn often just don't sit right with us? You think about a kindergarten teacher versus a social media manager, or a paramedic versus a corporate lobbyist. And the numbers, they just seem to defy any intuitive sense of justice. So, for the next few minutes, we're going to try and unpack that feeling and figure out what's really going on.
So here's our game plan. We'll start with the basic puzzle of what a just wage even is. Then we're going to bust 3 of the biggest myths out there. The idea that wages are about your contribution, your talent, or about basic fairness. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with a pretty sobering conclusion about what markets are actually for.
All right, so first up, before we start tearing everything down, we've got to understand the foundation. What is the market's own argument for how it sets wages in the first place?
And here it is, the core thesis of the paper we're looking at. The market, first and foremost, is an allocation system. Think of it like a giant sorting machine. Its primary job is efficiency, getting the right people into the right jobs to make the stuff the society wants. It is not designed to be a system of moral reward. In fact, the argument goes that anytime you set a wage that's different from the market rate, you actually create misallocation and economic waste.
Okay, let's tackle our first myth, and it is a huge one. This is the idea that you are paid based on what you contribute, what you produce. To each according to his or her contribution. It sounds perfectly fair, right? I mean, what could be more just? But let's see if it actually holds up when we look closer.
So, the official economic theory here is called marginal revenue product. It sounds complicated, but the idea is actually pretty simple. It says a company will keep hiring people for a certain job right up to the point where hiring one more person would cost them more in salary than that person would bring in as revenue. So in a perfect market, your wage isn't what you produce, it's what the last person hired for your kind of role produces.
And this brings us to a really crucial distinction. Absolute productivity is what you think it is. It's what you actually produce. Simple enough. But effective productivity is a what-if scenario. It's the value the company would lose if you left after they've reshuffled everyone else to cover all the most important stuff you were doing. This means the actual loss to the company isn't your total output, but the value of the least important task that no longer gets done because you're gone.
So here's the kicker, here's the takeaway. You are not paid for what you actually produce. You are paid based on what the company would lose if you vanished, which turns out to be just the value of that last marginal worker's contribution. What this means is that, essentially, everyone in a particular role gets paid as if they are replaceable by that final person who was hired.
Now, if that sounds too abstract, this example makes it crystal clear. Take 2 auto workers, one's in Canada, one's in Mexico. They're working in basically the same kind of factory, using the same technology, producing the same parts. Their absolute contribution is nearly identical, and yet their wages can be different by a factor of 10. Why? It's because their wages aren't tied to their individual output. They're determined by the overall productivity of the entire national economy they happen to be in. The myth that you're paid for your individual contribution, it just completely falls apart.
This leads us right into our second myth, which is just as popular. And that's the idea that your wages are a straightforward reward for your talent and your skills.
I mean, we all want to believe this is true, don't we? That our paycheck is a fair reflection of what we bring to the table, our intelligence, our education, our unique gifts.
But the market operates on a much colder, much more pragmatic logic. It's not really about what you bring. It's about how easily you can be replaced. The key variable here isn't talent itself, it's scarcity. And a few examples just demolish this whole talent argument. Think about it. Symphony musicians are incredibly, supremely talented, right? Yet many of them earn pretty modest wages because there's a huge supply of other highly trained musicians. On the flip side, as one economist pointed out, in the past, a unique human monstrosity in a circus could earn an absolute fortune just by being one of a kind. Or, for a darker example, a kidnapper's ransom has nothing to do with talent and everything to do with being the only person with the key. So scarcity, not talent, is what's really driving the price.
Okay, so if wages aren't really about contribution and they're not really about talent, then maybe they're about something simpler.
Fairness in the transaction itself? This brings us to our third and final myth, and the age-old idea of a just price.
Let's walk through this classic thought experiment. A massive snowstorm hits your town. You desperately need a snow shovel. You go to the local hardware store, and the owner sees everyone's desperation and doubles the price. Now, study after study has shown that most people, we're talking over 80% in one case, have an immediate gut reaction that this is deeply, deeply unfair.
And this gets to the absolute core of the conflict. Our moral intuition, the fairness argument, says the seller is just taking advantage of the situation, profiting from other people's bad luck. But the market's efficiency argument says something totally different. It says that higher price is a vital signal. It's a flashing red light that screams, "We need more shovels here." And that signal is what incentivizes a truck driver from the next town over to load up his own shovels and drive them into town, which ultimately solves the shortage for everybody.
So what this reveals is a really unavoidable conflict. The price that works best for the system as a whole, the price that maximizes efficiency and gets the shovels where they're needed most, is often completely at odds with our personal sense of fairness. If you design a system to be efficient, you pretty much have to accept that it's going to produce outcomes that often feel completely arbitrary and unjust.
So let's bring this all together and land on the paper's final and, pretty sobering conclusion. What does all this actually mean for our hopes of finding justice in a paycheck?
Well, think about this perfect modern example. A while back, there was a big public outcry because the security guards at Google's headquarters couldn't get the same free food as the direct Google employees. It just felt unfair, unequal. But Google's defense was simple. The guards don't work for us, they work for an outside contractor. And this shows exactly how companies manage this tension. Internally, there's a lot of pressure to be fair, but the market wage for a security guard is worlds apart from a software engineer's. So what's the solution? You outsource. You use the market to draw a hard line, separating the two groups to avoid that direct clash between efficiency and fairness.
And this quote from the paper's author, Joseph Heath, really just says it all. The market has one job to do, and it does that job very well. Producing just wages, however, is not that job. It's a ruthless, incredibly effective tool for getting labor and resources where they need to go. It's a system of incentives, plain and simple. It's not a system of moral rewards.
So we're left with this final, really challenging question. If we accept this argument that markets are structurally unable to deliver what we intuitively feel is justice, then where do we go from here? Does that mean we should just abandon the pursuit of economic justice altogether? Or maybe, does it mean we need to look for it somewhere else, completely outside the wage-setting mechanism of the market itself? That's a profound question for how we think about structuring our society. See you in the next one. Subscribe, like, and comment.